Now, turning to our program, please welcome Ed Krishup, past president and principal of Remaining Awake, to introduce our speaker.
Thank you, President Saj. It's an honor and a pleasure to welcome today's speaker, incoming Milwaukee County District Attorney Kent Lovern. Kent is an exemplary Rotarian who consistently distinguishes himself professionally in his personal life and as a community leader. We're in for a treat today. Professionally, Kent has worked as a prosecutor for over 26 years, most recently, and for just a few more weeks now, as Chief Deputy District Attorney for Milwaukee County. As Chief Deputy, he's prosecuted a full range of criminal offenders, including domestic violence offenders and major drug, gun, and gang offenders, and he's handled police misconduct cases. Kent works effectively with law enforcement to be tough on crime, take violent offenders off the street, and protect the integrity of our criminal justice system. He also collaborates effectively with community members working on a number of crime prevention initiatives between the District Attorney's Office and key community partners. These collaborations have focused on bringing community members together to address the complexities of domestic abuse and the complexities of mental health. Personally, Kent has made the Milwaukee community home for over 30 years. He's married to Susan, who is president and CEO of Unreason and Roper, and is with us here today. Kent and Susan live in Shorewood and have their hands and hearts full as the caring parents of 2 young adult sons, Sam and Zach. And if you happen to be at Atwater Beach in Shorewood at 6 in the morning, any morning, you can enjoy a cold plunge with part of the Lovern family. As a community leader, Kent serves in leadership roles on the boards of MKE Urban Stables, Urban Ecology Center, and our own Rotary Club of Milwaukee. He is a board member of the Milwaukee Continuum of Care and a past board member of Sojourner Family Peace Center and the National Alliance for the Mentally Ill of Greater Milwaukee. Kent was a leading voice for our club's embracing MKE Urban Stables as our big project a few years ago. And as the first president of the MKE Urban Stables Board, he was a key leader in putting the plan for the stables into action, providing much-needed trauma-informed therapy for Milwaukee teens and veterans, and bridging the gaps between community and members of the police. And Kent, who I guess wants to be sure that he has literally no free time to spare, is in line to be our next Rotary Club president. He's our president-elect, and will start his presidency in July of next year. To use Governor Tony Evers' "How Wisconsin is he" test, Kent is as Wisconsin as it comes. He cares about us, he shows up, and he brings people together to get things done. He has the remarkable ability to see the big picture and to set in motion the big and small things to make that picture better at a deep systemic level. We're so very fortunate to have Kent in our community and in our Rotary Club fellow Rotarians. Please give a warm Rotary welcome to our club's president-elect and to our incoming Milwaukee County District Attorney, Kent Lovern.
Well, thank you so much. I really appreciate that, Ed. Thanks for the introduction. Ed is somebody, of course, I've worked with for many years on a number of projects, and we met through this club, which has been a connector for me in so many ways. I did want to start by just saying that to all of you. You know, so many of you, this was my first run at public office, and I didn't know what to expect, except a lot of hard work in doing so, and so many of you were very supportive to me in many, many ways, and I just want to say that to you, how much I appreciated that, how gratified I was to receive that, and it meant personally a great deal to me and to my wife, and so thank you for that. We did learn some lessons through this process. Ultimately, I was fortunate. It was not what I foresaw. I ultimately did run unopposed for this position, but we did learn some lessons along the way in any case. Certainly, Susan and I would tell you that we learned it's a lot easier to raise financial support for your favorite charitable cause than it is for me, or was for me, to ask for financial support for myself or for a political campaign. That's a difficult task, and the generous response I received was humbling, I can tell you that. Our 2 boys learned something as well. You know, they are almost 21 and almost 18, and so they are, you know, starting to envision themselves in the adult world here. And what they learned through watching this process is that it is a lot easier to land a job if you look for one that no one else wants. And so it was a productive time for all of us. So for the first few minutes here, you may ask yourself as I get going here why I want this job. But I hope really by the end of this, you'll understand where I'm coming from and what I hope to bring to this position and hopefully to the community as well. So let's start with the public safety landscape here. It's been very challenged. I don't think there's any question about that, right? Particularly during the pandemic, crime has been at a high that I have never thought I would see in my career. And I want to make clear that most of my comments about public safety and crime will be relevant to Milwaukee, of course, but these trends existed everywhere nationally. Violent crime in particular spiked to levels around the country during the pandemic years. And I do think there's a direct correlation between what was happening in our country at that time and the reactions that people had to that. It's not for 1 minute to justify anyone's harmful behavior to someone else. There is no justification for that. I do think, though, it is important to understand what was going on at that time, what the backdrop was, how people were feeling, because if we really want to get ahead of issues relating to public safety, it is important for us to know why people are acting and behaving the way they are. And so there's just no question that at the time of the pandemic, when so many of us were isolating because we had to, we just saw a disintegration almost by definition of community. And even though there were many ways we tried to stay connected, we all know it wasn't the same thing. We also know that many times when there are large events that sweep the country, economic events that are troubling, they impact all of us, but certainly they impact those who are already most vulnerable the most. And there's no question, as we saw during the pandemic, that if your health was compromised, if your personal finances were compromised, if your educational situation was compromised, you were suffering at a much higher level than all of us were to some extent. And so, again, what we saw after that was a level of crime and response by people in ways I had never seen. So, for example, we saw people committing crime who were literally committing a very serious crime as their first offense in the criminal justice system. I mean, that's not very common. We saw a lot of that happening during the first year or two of the pandemic. That's unusual. When you think about the fact that we were isolated and not really in contact with one another, you can remember what the roadways looked like at the time, how the cities looked vacant, just that eerie feeling that we all could see each and every day. And you think about then how people would react to that. Certainly children not in school, which we knew had to happen for good reasons, but we also knew was very harmful to them. And we also know that as much as we all need to be tethered to things, young people in particular need structure. And young people will find ways to still be in contact with one another one way or another, and we saw a lot of that happening during the pandemic. Clearly we've all seen, for example, reckless driving and the dangerousness of that. That perhaps could be the most antisocial daily activity you can imagine in some ways, particularly in places where we're all, as a community driving down a roadway, and we've all experienced that. So I say that just to give you a snapshot of where we're at now. We certainly have seen downward trends in crime, and the mayor was here a couple weeks ago. We talked about that. That's absolutely the case. I think we all agree, though, and we can all see that the levels of crime are still high. They are still high relative to the time before the pandemic, and there is still a lot of work to be done here. There is no question that what I heard from city residents in particular this year, and I was in neighborhoods in Milwaukee for the most part, talking to people in the neighborhoods that are most impacted by crime on a daily basis, and they are asking repeatedly for a strong response to that. And there was almost no question about that from people who are seeing crime on a daily basis in their neighborhoods, sometimes just right outside their front door, and they are just repeatedly asking me to make sure that our system responded strongly to that. So I think it's important to know that's where people are, especially those who are seeing this each and every day. At the same time we saw this spike in violent crime, though, of course, we also saw this spike in mental health crises and people with addiction issues. And we know many of us have been touched by one or the other of those things in our family, with loved ones or friends. I mean, this is ubiquitous now. This is in some ways, if there's a silver lining, the hope would be that any stigma attached to talking about mental health is evaporating, because so many of us had some experience with that through one person or another who we care about or love, right? And addiction is the same way. Addiction is now something that we see at very high levels, and in fact now are finding ways to try to combat that in the moment when somebody is suffering from an addiction that could kill them. So what do we need how do we need to respond to that? I think that people are saying we need a therapeutic response to that, and I absolutely agree with that. That is in line with some of the things we have done in our office for now many years, because some of these issues are bona fide healthcare issues that need to be treated by healthcare professionals. And certainly my general philosophy has always been that we try to look at people and their actions in two general categories. People who are hurting others and people who are more of a threat to themselves. And certainly the violent crime is very easy to understand and should be easy to respond to. And from my standpoint, it is. It deserves a very straightforward response, and in a very punitive, if not for a better word, fashion. On the other hand, so many people we see and that law enforcement encounter are struggling in a mental health crisis. They're struggling with the impacts of their addiction. They may not have the intent to hurt anybody, but they are clearly hurting themselves and need immediate interventions. And that's what we have to continue to try to deliver to them, certainly as long as they're willing to receive that. So these are this is the landscape we're sort of walking into now as we approach 2025 now, several years after the onset of the pandemic, where we're trying to decide what the new normal is here. Things aren't back to what we would hope they would be, but certainly as we see downward trends in crime, I think we do see that as a reflection of the fact that some things are feeling normal again in a newer sense of the word, clearly different, but more stable than they were. So the question ultimately becomes is, what do we do, and what is our opportunity as this community to not just settle for a pre-pandemic level of safety, because that wasn't great in my view, but what can we do as a community to really achieve lasting levels of public safety that everyone in this community deserves on a daily basis? And that's, I will tell you where I'm coming from with regard to why I want this job. So let me tell you for a minute about what our office does. We have a number of units. They specialize in different areas. Certainly family violence is a predominant area that we deal with, because so much of what we deal with starts in the household. So we have 30 lawyers at the Children's Court Center in Wauwatosa, most of whom deal with children in need of protective services. And they are trying to intervene in families where we see signs of abuse and neglect to stem that condition as soon as we possibly can. At times, our lawyers will be involved in terminating the rights of parents if it comes to that, but that's certainly seen as a last resort. Downtown, we have a number of prosecutors who do nothing but domestic violence cases. I will tell you, on the whole in our office, we review probably 30,000 matters in the whole in Milwaukee County. About 27% of those matters are domestic violence cases. Okay, that's a huge amount of our portfolio, and as someone who's been in that field, my colleague Jeff Altenberg, and close friend, is here. He and I started in the DV unit, and we did this work for years at the beginning of our career. He will move into my position when I become the DA, and we struggled with how do we respond to such a difficult issue that we know actually creates a climate for young people then to engage in violent behavior themselves, right? We all know that if the home life is unstable, that makes things very difficult for children in that household. Certainly Sojourner Family Peace Center was and is a model. It's a national model that I was privileged to help lead the development of. I think that has been helpful in terms of harnessing a number of services together. But we have to think about what the ways are now that we have to reach families in a post-COVID world who are not necessarily accessing services perhaps the way they did before, and who are still in a habit of being isolated. Because as we know, isolation is about the worst place you can be if you're in a domestic violence relationship. So I will tell you, that is an ongoing challenge that I view as one of our largest in this community. And certainly it can spill and feed into lots of other problems we see. We have dedicated units in our office related to violent crime, including homicide, sensitive crimes. You heard from one of my colleagues here a few weeks ago about human trafficking. Our prosecutors do terrific work, and she's certainly one of them, and I was so glad to hear from her. We have prosecutors who do nothing with firearms, prosecutions, non-fatal shootings, large drug trafficking organizations. So we try to specialize in our office in certain categories, like a law firm, because we find that actually helps our lawyers do a more effective job. And because, as you'll hear very soon, we have a young office, we are working very hard to try to train people into certain areas where they can excel as quickly as possible. Another area that I think is very important in terms of building the type of community that we need to see here relates to our community partnership unit. And Jeff really was the architect of a lot of this work in our office over the last 18 years. We have prosecutors in every large neighborhood in Milwaukee, meaning in every police district in Milwaukee, and their job is to work with the neighborhood, with community groups of people in the neighborhoods, and the police department to identify those emerging issues in the neighborhoods before they become total catastrophes. And we have done that at a very high level in many, many ways, and related to things like homelessness. You heard Jim Matthew here a couple weeks ago from the housing department, and he, I think, alluded to the fact that we developed together with others the response to panhandling downtown. And that was a collaborative approach that has addressed that issue quite effectively. We now have a prosecutor downtown funded by the Downtown Business Improvement District because they value that connectivity that our prosecutor can provide with all of the other entities in the neighborhood. So we have 8 of these prosecutors in the neighborhoods handling the issues of importance to those particular neighborhoods, and it really is crime prevention in nature is the idea. We have several treatment courts in the system. One is a drug treatment court we've had for many years. Again, for those who have that addiction that they can't let go of. We have a veterans component of that as well, because we know so many of our veterans struggle with addiction, and we want them to get the help they need. And we also have a mental health treatment court that, at my urging and at the urging of the community in the last year, we created and made a full-time court, because I think the demand is there, the community has asked for that, and our Chief Judge Carl Ashley deserves enormous credit for driving that forward, because it's not easy to create a new court out of some other place in the courthouse, and he did that, and I appreciate that. So to tell you a little bit about, those are the global challenges we see each and every day that we're responding to, and who is doing that work. We have a young office, so we have 130 prosecutors, which is a solid number. It's ironically about the number we've had for my entire almost 27-year tenure in the office. We've been right at that level. It seems to work well for what the community needs are. The challenge we have is half of our office has less than 5 years of experience. And that has been a challenge over time. Some of you are aware of, resulting from the pay structure for public defenders and state prosecutors, that the state has taken some substantial steps toward remediating in the last budget. We hope that continues. But the fact is that public service jobs for attorneys and every other occupation, every other public service job you can imagine, pay more than what you'll make as a public defender or as a prosecutor. And I've been publicly saying we need that for the public defenders, just like we need it for prosecutors, to keep our system in the hands of experienced people who want to do the work, who want to stay and do the work because they love serving this community. So that's an ongoing challenge. The other challenge you should be aware of is that for a number of years, a portion of our office, of our attorneys, have been funded with federal grant dollars that even E. Michael McCann was starting to gather back in the 1970s and 80s. And it's funded almost a third of our office over time. Right now, it's about 25% of our office that's been funded with dollars, not through the state, but by federal grants. And one of those grants is ARPA funding that will expire in the middle of this year, which will reduce our staffing by 10%. So that's 12 and a half prosecutors, 10% of our office. We have made a request to the state in this budget process for that to be filled with dollars that make those positions permanent. And again, I've been in this office for a long time. I know the budgeting of this office quite well, and my fundamental belief about government is we should never ask for more than we need, but we should ask for what we need. And so, at any time, if you hear me ask for something, it will be because we need it, not because it's extra or fluff. It's just not how I value public dollars. But it is something we will need. And the final point about infrastructure I would add is that, I don't know if any of you have been in the courthouse complex at all. We have the beautiful courthouse, and we also have the safety building, which is the office building adjacent to that. Not so beautiful, crumbling. Crumbling, in fact, and I'm not about the aesthetics here, but it is worth noting that, frankly, that building is literally falling apart. It was originally the old jail in this county, and unfortunately about 20% of it is still blocked out in old jail cells that are of no use to us for our regular offices, and we have courtrooms. All the criminal courtrooms are in that building. So the county, led by the county executive, who you'll hear from next week, has put together a team of us to identify what the needs are around a new building. It will not be inexpensive, I can tell you that, but that's also part of the ask of the state, because any of these buildings ever built around the country have required some state-local partnership along the way. So I will tell you, just as an anecdote, what the challenges of our building are and how they relate to public safety. So we're in corridors all the time that are very narrow, so when we have particularly high-profile, intense felony jury trials, where you might have participants on both sides, witnesses for the state, witnesses for the defense. Everyone is mostly crowded in the same space. That's not a good environment, I can tell you, having walked through those hallways almost every day. That can be a fairly intense environment, and in fact, we've had incidents that have resulted in the need for law enforcement to intervene because it can be too intense. It can also result in delays of cases when witnesses who are supposed to be sequestered or separated inadvertently talk with one another or talk with jurors who are making their way in and out of the courtrooms as well. So the functionality of that building is terrible. That's all I can tell you. And again, it will be a process to replace it, but it is something that really needs to be done. So I've kind of told you some of the challenges we have and some of the problems. Some of these are very self-evident to all of you anyway in our community. And so I'd like to just share with you in the last few minutes here what I see are about some paths forward. The one item here, this is a little in the weeds, but I do think that, frankly, we ought to seek technological improvements that can help public safety. And this is something I would invite any input from anyone in the private sector on, because I think this is where private sector knowledge could be very helpful to our system. There are, for example, drone technology, when we think about these pursuits by squads of people at 80 miles an hour through the county. What could drone technology do to help that in terms of keeping the squad from endangering people along the way as well? I think, we're all concerned about how many firearms are out there. And I will tell you, look, firearm sales just skyrocketed during the pandemic everywhere. So we have firearms everywhere in every community in the United States. I'm intrigued by technology that does exist, that has existed for several years now, related to firearms known as smart guns that have a technology that allows a person's fingerprint to activate the unlocking of that gun. And again, there's no one solution that will be a panacea, but I'm so deeply troubled, not only by the firearm violence we see on the streets, but what we see happening all too often in this community as it relates to young children in a household picking up that firearm and killing someone else, or wounding someone else, and it happens far too often. We also know that firearm violence impacts deaths by suicide as well. At a high rate, people in mental health distress who have access to a firearm, often not their own, use it and die by suicide. So these are, I think, these are enhancements, just a couple that I'm certainly intrigued by and would like to see what the possibilities are. In the big picture, though, when we think about what kind of a community we really want to have and how we achieve a level of enduring peace in this community, we have to just think about how we are situated as a community. And the reality is that in the aftermath of the pandemic, in the post-COVID world, people need to feel a sense of community. They need to feel more connected to one another. And we all have a way that we can work on that somehow in our daily lives, in our professional lives, in whatever organizations we belong to. We have got to we've got to double down on the amount of effort we are undertaking to connect people to one another. And I can just tell you that the amount of isolation people still feel today, you know, all the polling that gets done around the election, and it polls people's moods and how they're feeling, a lot of that still is reflecting a deep sense of isolation that people have, a sense that they don't belong to something, a sense that they're not part of a community. It's so important for all of us to have that in order to have a healthy community. And in particular, young people need that. You know, the very young people who are the future of this community need to see a place where they can envision their future. And it can't be just a future that they see afflicted by violence, or a lack of opportunity, or a lack of housing, or a lack of food. And too often we are seeing too many families in this community who struggle with that each and every day. And we have to impress upon people, and none of this is easy, I'm not suggesting that, but I am saying that it is fundamental. It is fundamental to a community that will be the healthiest it can be, the safest it can be, the most prosperous it can be. This is a fundamental quality we have to achieve here. We just have to. And every community in America is struggling with this. But people have got to have a greater sense of their self-worth. Because we know if people don't value themselves, they will not value anyone else they encounter on the street. They will not encounter their neighborhood. They will not regard their neighborhood with care and respect. And that's why it is so important for us to build that mindset of inclusion in the sense of feeling like they're part of a community. So how does that happen? Well, education clearly is critical, and many of you have been in that space as volunteers. I will tell you there is a direct correlation between being able to read and staying out of the criminal justice system. So we have to just continue to do that. Certainly those who've fallen out of the system because of the pandemic, we need to figure out how they can find a retraining way into the job market. And we have a lot of groups in this community right now strengthening neighborhoods daily, right now. 414 Life, community interveners through the city and through the county who are working in neighborhoods every day to diffuse conflict. These are really important jobs they're undertaking right now. As they're seeing emerging fights between people, they're working very hard to try to diffuse that before it turns explosive, and we need to support that. We need to learn more about that and support it. And finally, I would say the economic prosperity piece in this region is critical. It's absolutely critical. We have to, well, let me just say this. Neighborhoods that have high rates of home stability and family-supporting jobs do not have high rates of crime. That's a fact. And we know that we have high rate of housing insecurity right now. We know that economically we have large gaps that are unacceptable, and we just have to work very hard on that. I am not finger pointing at anybody. I'm just saying, in order to have the level of safety we all deserve, this is where we have to find it. I'll give you a quick example of a city that I think is on its way, and that's the city of Boston right now. So Boston, this year, we are down to, in Milwaukee, we're down to just over 110 homicides right now. That's where we're at right now. Those numbers are way down from the pandemic, right? And they're still too high, of course. Boston right now has 16 homicides. Okay, so I called the district attorney in Boston a few weeks ago. We had a long conversation, and I'm like, what is going on there? And what's going on is something that started even 20 years before. It was called then the Boston Miracle, where all the things that I'm telling you about right now, and we actually have a lot going on here in this community right now, at the neighborhood level, at the ground level. They just cemented the consolidation of that work together. They just synchronized it better. And as he talked to me more and more about what they have done, that's what we have the makings of that here already, but we have got to consolidate our efforts in a much more cohesive fashion. And the other point I would make, and this is why it relates to the economic piece, is Boston is, if you look on the cities of wealth in America, Boston's on that list. We're not on that list. We're on the list of the cities that are struggling economically, even though we know we have a lot of resources here to work with. So that's why the economic piece is ultimately so important. And the DA talked to me about how they better connect people who are at risk, vulnerable people. They prosecute the ones who need to be prosecuted, but the others in that same neighborhood, they find ways to connect to jobs. And that's what we have to do. It's not easy to do it, but we have to work very hard at it. And I'm convinced that in the long run, that's our prospect for the level of safety and security that we all deserve. So in sum, I would say, I actually believe we are really well positioned. I think we're better positioned in a lot of ways than many other communities in this country, because one of our strengths is we are literally a degree or two separated from one another. That is a fact, and that is a strength that I think we can play to. We also, for a city our size, remember, the smallest major league city, the smallest NBA city, a championship city, by the way, a fine arts landscape here that rivals every big city. We have innovation here in the nonprofit community in a big way and in our business community. We have the largest fresh water right outside our door here. I mean, we have so many assets here to work with that I truly believe, and the last thing I would say is, I think we have a high level of civic pride in this place. I think people care very deeply about what happens here, and they want to see this be obviously the most safest place and the most healthy place it can be for everybody. I think people genuinely care about this to a very, very high degree. So look, I'll just finish by saying, people are interested in coming to Milwaukee right now. There's a lot going on here, and I think people coming here and interested in coming here want to see a community that is solving its problems, that is tackling these tough issues that everybody has right now on their plate. And if we can be one of those communities, I have no doubt that in the post-COVID world, we can emerge as a leader. So, in closing, I really appreciate the opportunity you're giving me to serve as your district attorney for the next several years. And I very much look forward to meeting these challenges and opportunities head on with you. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Kent. And I'm going to ask a question first, which is, how can Rotary and Rotarians play a role in your vision for a stronger community?
Well, I tell you, this club, in my view, is more relevant than ever. I mean, number one, we are a place, just look at who's in this room each and every day, each and every week. I mean, from a wide variety of backgrounds with a wide variety of beliefs who come together in a room committed to doing things for this community. I think we need to just keep doing what we're doing, and frankly, we are an example of what we need more of in this community. There's just no question in my mind about that.
Thank you.
Kendall, we're all behind you and look forward to your tenure as a district attorney. But you guys can do a wonderful job of prosecuting, but if the judges don't convict and sentence, then your hands are tied. What do you see happening with that?
Well, we operate in the criminal justice system, which is where all three branches of government meet, right? So executive branch, judicial branch, you refer to, and legislative branch. And look, I've just said to my staff very plainly what I've said to you about and this is not a new approach. I want to make that very clear. It's not, we have always had when it comes to recommendations on sentences for people committing violent crime, we've always had a standard approach to recommending removal from the community for whatever amount of time is appropriate. So that is nothing, I want to make sure that's nothing new here that I'm saying. We have to make the case. I will tell you that the more people pay attention to our system overall too, the better, the public. I mean, we've certainly seen outreach from some groups in the community who've had an increased interest in watching what goes on in our court proceedings. They asked me how I felt about it, and I welcome that. That also includes scrutiny over my office, right? And every decision that gets made every day that I don't know about is going to be made in my name, right? I totally welcome that scrutiny, because I think the more engagement we have by the larger community around what goes on in the system, the more I think we'll see the outcomes that I think most people would generally agree are appropriate.
Well, congratulations, inspiring speech. Milwaukee was the site of the Republican National Convention, obviously, and one of the things we touted was the mayor's relationship with the Republican legislature coming to yes. We've seen some resistance, obviously, to what the voters have decided in terms of the national election. Do you have any thoughts on what opportunities exist, if any, or threats exist, if any, on working with the federal government, with the new administration to address the complex problems that you just identified?
No, look, I think that my focus clearly has been on what people have told me locally about their daily lives and their concern about their safety. That existed certainly before the election, and it exists after the election. It's still the same, and that's what I have to be focused on. I will say that, you know, during my campaign, I received, you know, a lot of support across the political spectrum, and I was pleased to receive that because in my view, public safety should be a nonpartisan issue, and these are the issues that, frankly, are important to each and every member of this community. And so all I can say is, you know, my work and my commitment to this community remains exactly the same, regardless of what the federal government looks like. And I would hope to work with anybody who, at any level of government, who wants to make our community healthier and safer.
Hello. Following up somewhat a similar line, your predecessor was kind of a target for the Republicans in the legislature. I think people in this room would be shocked to find out that the largest county in the state has the lowest paid district attorney in the state because of the last budget. We've seen the mayor and the county executive establish relationships with the Republicans in the legislature with the recognition is we can't solve our problems. So my question would be, have you started to reach out to Republican legislative leaders to try and build some relationships so that our community can benefit?
Yes, and I think it's important to do that. At the end of the day, and as I said, I was pleased and grateful to have the support of people on the Republican side of the aisle as I ran for district attorney, saying to them the exact same things I've said to you today. I mean, the message is the same regardless of who I speak with, and so I am optimistic that we'll have a strong relationship with the powers that be in Madison, and I look forward to developing that.
Congratulations. I hate to ask you to go negative, but I will. Given the extent to which your staff and resources are stretched thin, and given the reality that you're probably not going to get more resources, maybe lose some, is there some area that you have identified or are willing to try to identify that we're trying to handle through the criminal justice system, taking tons of court time and your staff time that could be handled in a different way than it is now? And are you willing to take a look at that, carve some area out so that your staff can do what they're supposed to be doing properly?
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, I think that as you got a glimpse of, we have our hands on a lot of things going on. I will tell you that in my experience, what works very well are the providers of services at the very neighborhood level, right, at the grassroots level. But those services need to be financially supported as well. And that's not easy work that people are doing. When I talk about violence interruption on a daily basis, or when we talk about what to provide for folks struggling with mental health concerns. I mean, I don't think we have enough mental health resources in this community, but we have a prevalence of mental health that's higher than ever right now. So, yeah, I would love to steer some of these things that land people in jail into a therapeutic opportunity for sure. It will take some resources someplace along the line. So all I'm saying is if the resources don't want to be given to my office, they need to be given elsewhere because the amount we have right now isn't enough to meet the overall need.
Congratulations again.
Thank you.
She's a guest, so she hasn't had the more than the 30-second questions.
Oh, no. Okay. Congratulations. And my question actually is based on an incident I have, so I have to relate that. A couple of years ago, I was stopped by the police for speeding, and the only ever time I was stopped, and I don't think I was speeding, but the police officer proceeded to ask for my fingerprints, which I later found out was totally not necessary. So my question is, as a naturalized citizen, how do I know what my rights are? Where do I go for finding out, what my rights are?
I'm looking at Edgar Lynn right now, actually, because he's had a lot of experience with representing people in the civil rights realm. I mean, I think that, the reality is I'm not sure I have one site you should go to. I mean, I'd be happy to talk to you afterward and talk a little bit further about in detail what would be helpful should you have an experience like that again. Because I think, look, at the end of the day, and I'm sure the chief would say the same thing were he here, that he would endeavor for any police-citizen contact to be what it needs to be under the circumstances, right? To meet the situation at hand. So I'd be happy to talk to you further about that. Okay.
I have one more question if nobody else has one, which one of the things that we're hearing a lot about right now is mass deportation. So if we are looking at that in 2025, I don't really know what role local officials have in that at all, and what that would be.
Yeah, very little, I think, certainly from our standpoint. Where we touch immigration the most relates to people who could be witnesses or victims in cases of ours that may be here as undocumented individuals, and so they can apply for visas that allow them to remain here as a crime victim or as an essential witness to a serious crime. So we'll just have to see what that's generally the extent of, in a large way, the connection we have to immigration issues in our office. I think that would largely be, a federal concern. Hey, Joe.
Hi. Does this community have adequate space in prisons, primarily for youth prisons?
Yeah, I will say that right now, I think most facilities locally where youth are held. So let's just to quickly define, a person under the age of 17 is considered a juvenile in Wisconsin under criminal law. So at the age of 17 in Wisconsin, you're an adult, and you're in the adult system downtown. There are a number of beds at the detention center out in Wauwatosa right now where young people are being housed, and I think that number is around 100. There is, of course, Lincoln Hills, the prison that is set to close at some point and be replaced by a facility in Milwaukee that will be another 32 beds or so. That will remain to be seen, to be honest with you. I think that there are differing opinions about whether that's enough. The hope would be, is that enough of the other programming around young people at an earlier age, I'm talking about before they commit the crime that involves a firearm, that involves a violent crime, that the hope would be in the juvenile system that when that young person first is on the radar screen for something, that the amount of remediation for that young person doing a fairly harmless thing that lands them police attention would be dealt with then. That's got to be the goal, because too many right now are at a level committing crimes that none of us want to see. I will say it is true too that the amount of juvenile crime right now has gone down. Again, the amount what we see and hear of though is certainly appalling, and none of us want any of our young people engaging in this type of behavior. So I think we'll have to see whether that's going to be enough or not. I think time will tell. I would say that to you very honestly.
Well, thank you, Ken, for your... And I just have to say thank you, Kent, for your leadership in the community and in Rotary. We're very proud to have you be one of us. So thank you.